Nashville Design Week is a platform for bold collaborations and conversations that promote idea sharing, engage and educate the public, and strengthen our city's design culture. We shine a spotlight on designers who are shaping the city's future and facilitate critical conversation about the industry's growth and impact.
2020 has challenged us in every way. A tornado, a pandemic, and a long overdue reckoning with racial inequity. And as we close in on a formative election, we are excited to focus on the power of design to reshape communities and to actively support equity. We are proud to introduce a diverse range of speakers covering everything from racial injustice and inequity to diversity and inclusion, connectivity, and allyship, all through the lens of design.
We're fortunate to partner with design leaders who are invested in the future of Nashville's design community. These leaders see Nashville Design Week as essential and support making design discourse accessible to all. Thank you endlessly to our 2020 sponsors for helping us bring Nashville Design Week to life. Thank you to founding silver sponsor, Hastings. Hastings is a boutique architecture and interior design firm of 75 professionals who are deeply committed to the service of clients, producing award-winning, thoughtful, and impactful architecture. Thank you to silver sponsor, Watkins College of Art and O'Moore College of Architecture and Design at Belmont University. The Watkins College of Art and the O'Moore College of Architecture and Design celebrate the power of art and design to transform people, communities, cultures, and the world. Thank you to our copper sponsors, Elevated Outcomes, Interface, Smith G Studio, and Textures Nashville. Thank you to our bronze sponsors, Aberdeen Studio, Alfred Williams & Company, Circa Creative Studios, Dade, EOA Architects, Earl Swenson Associates, and Manuel Zeitlin Architects.
And thank you to our media partners, Dezeen, Lightning 100, and Nashville Interiors, and to creative directors Lindsay and Alan Lassiter.
Nashville Design Week is proud to be a fiscally sponsored project of the Arts and Business Council of Greater Nashville, a nonprofit organization. Nashville Design Week is an entirely volunteer effort made possible by the tireless dedication of our team. Now, let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nashville Design Week. My name is Paige Jessup, and I am a volunteer program coordinator for Social Justice and the Art of Black Experience and for Socially Conscious Art and Design. Today is a double feature program for lunch, and I would like to start by beginning to introduce our first host, Donna Woodley. So Donna Woodley is a visual artist whose works primarily discuss the relationship between Black culture and American culture. The figure in her paintings is confrontational towards the visibility and value of Black people within American society, both historically and in a contemporary context. The exploration of human connection and the importance of every individual story is what primarily represents the themes of Donna's work. A significant part of her process involves the enlistment of men and women that she knows, including herself. This allows her to evaluate the complexity of human emotions and relationships in her art. Informed by stereotypes, cultural similarities and differences, perceptions of beauty, mental health, and esteem, Donna's work often uses subtle humor to create an environment conducive to healthy dialogue. She currently resides in Nashville, Tennessee, where she maintains her practice and is an educator of art at Austin Peay State University and Tennessee State University. So with that, I'd like to introduce Donna Woodley.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you so much.
Hi, Donna.
Great. Hey. It is so great to be here. I'm so excited for this talk/discussion with my two first and foremost friends, and then amazing artists and creatives. Again, the name of the discussion that we'll be having today, and it's a bit of a talk and a discussion. It's called Social Justice and Art of the Black Experience. I do have a handout for you guys, and I'm so glad you're here. I can't see you, but I just feel the good energy. And please access that handout. It has our information, website information, and then social media handles, and we'd love to hear from you. I'm going to start off with introductions. Paige gave you my introduction. She introduced me through my bio. And Lakesha and Stephanie will introduce themselves. But what I just wanted to do first is give you a quick rundown of how our session will go. So they'll introduce themselves, Lakesha and Stephanie, and then we'll all three do individual talks, kind of a short talk on our work, what we've been doing. And then we'll have some panel questions that we'll discuss. They're pretty juicy, I believe, and that they will spark a very good discussion about where we are in presently with all the things that have been going on. I think most people will agree that 2020 is one for the books. And so I'm sure that will come to play here today. Okay, so I am going to give Lakesha the floor to introduce herself and tell you about her.
Hey everyone, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Donna, and thank you, Paige, for giving me this platform to share with you all. As Donna said, and as Paige has already said, I work at Tennessee State University. I'm a painter, a portrait painter, and I grew up in Nashville. I went to school at Washington University in St. Louis, and then I went on to UT Knoxville. And there I kind of lost my way with the figure a little bit, lost my way with color. But in 2009, I was approached about a position in St. Thomas in the Caribbean. And that is where I think I regained my voice using color and also with the figure. So I wanted that's a place that's special for me. From there, I came back to Tennessee. I began working at Tennessee State University about 6 years ago now. And I used my voice as an artist to paint portraits of Black women primarily, but also Black men subsequently, right? And the first time I started showing in Nashville, a journalist asked me why I had paintings of Black and brown people. And even to this day, my answer to that is why not? You know, this is my experience and this is what I want to share. And so as an instructor and as a painter, I believe it's important not only to instruct and learn, but to be a mentor for my students. So that's one of my passions as a teacher, you know, in that space at TSU, to be a mentor and also reflect what my students see in the mirror and also show them the potentiality of all the things that they can do, whether it's traveling, whether it's speaking, whether it's making life-changing moves that not only affect them, but those around them. So thank you for having me today.
That is awesome, Lakesha. Thank you. Stephanie, go right ahead.
Hi, I am Stephanie Pruitt-Gaines, and a good bit of my professional work has centered around being a poet, a working writer and artist, but I'm also very interested in how poems live in the world physically. So I've often published poems as a way to affect the landscape. So published poems on sidewalks, on walls. But a big part of my life has also been committed to collecting art, and collecting art as a way of shaping my life experience and the life experience of my family, personally in our home, but also intentionally collecting as a way to shape a community experience. So I'll share a video now that might give some context to that. Stephanie Pruitt-Gaines, and the Nia Collection is the art my family lives with every day. I started collecting about 20 years ago when I was actually pregnant with my daughter. At the time, life was kind of chaotic. Things were not the way, they weren't ideal, but I decided the one thing I could control was the atmosphere in our home. I decided that in addition to being, present and loving, I could put things in our home that would affirm her concept of identity. I could put things in the home that would make her think about certain ideas or just be surrounded with beauty, and that's something I could control. I could control the atmosphere in our home, on our walls, and what she would see every day. And knowing that she would spend so much time in the home, I wanted to be really conscious about the art and design elements as part of designing her life experience. I didn't have money. So initially I went to yard sales and thrift stores. I checked art books out at the library. I went to artist talks. Eventually I was able to acquire works directly from artists, galleries, and auctions. It was something my daughter Nia and I, and now my husband Al, do together. Some families go camping or do jigsaw puzzles. We're art and culture sluts. It doesn't have to be some highbrow, one day maybe kind of thing. You know, we don't qualify as major collectors with our budget, but collecting has been a major part of our everyday lives. It's about deciding what you want to see and feel around you. So there we go. And I'll pass it back to you, Donna.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was amazing. Okay, so now we'll go into the individual talks portion. I'm so excited for you guys to hear about the work that's being done, and amazing work from Lakesha. She's about to present her talk now. Go ahead, Lakesha.
There we go. Sorry about that. All right. So first, I have a few questions here. Art and life. Who am I? What is my story? And how will I tell it? I'm a firm believer in the power of our stories and how our histories are interconnected. And when we share them, it breeds a sense of belonging and also a sense of purpose. And it definitely highlights our presence to the world. So I have an image of my, a painting of my mother here. And I was asked by a group of older Black women to tell my story. And in that, they asked me, I said, I didn't know what to share. And they asked me, tell me about your mother. And in that moment, I learned how much my story is interwoven in her story and her story is interwoven in my story. And so why not show this person who once represented a paradise of protection for me, right, in the womb, now, as someone who is still part of my story. So that's an important element to my work, telling the story through portraiture. One of the artist statements, I'll read it aloud. We are constantly profiling ourselves based on others' perceptions, based on historical knowns and unknowns, often because this is the expectation. These files appear easier to sift through, but our own profiles and sense of self remain ignored and uncultivated, discarded, or hidden. My aim is to delicately uncover them. So kind of uncovering those things that we sometimes hide on purpose, sometimes are asked to hide, but we're so used to being kept quiet, kept hidden, right? So now let's unveil ourselves a little bit. And I also consider myself a poet, a writer. Sometimes the work that I make visually influences the work that I write. And so, and this piece on the left is called Weaving Identity. And again, I'm very much interested in identity and belonging. And so In the Now was a poem that I wrote several years ago, as a way to understand how we connect to different people and when those things happen, because it's not always something that we know will happen, right? Of course, but as we move, in our purpose, people are placed in our lives and we are placed in other people's lives to change and enhance them in a lot of ways. Dreams in Silhouette, I think you can see this okay, but Dreams in Silhouette is a series that I was doing that was based on young women that I had the privilege to teach. I call them prayers of affirmation, because they aren't particularly famous in their own right, but they are the stars of their own stories and their own destinies. And I thought that was important to share. They're all hues, all sizes, and I just found so much beauty in them. I also found so much promise and potential. I was encouraged by their journey as I was able to kind of engage a little bit, of their story. Can we as Afro-Cobra artists sacrifice the wants of self and ego to create the needed positive visual images of our people? The answer was yes, we can. I was struck by this quote a few years ago when I was able to go to the exhibit Soul of a Nation. And in that exhibit, I saw so much work. Wadsworth Gerald, to name a few, was Art of the Age of Black Power. And I was introduced to these bold colors and these this vibrant way to show the culture of Black people. And I was blown away and I was encouraged. It reminded me that it was okay to paint what was in my spirit, what was in my soul. I think for so long we sit in this questioning period of, is this okay to paint? Will this show me in the best light? But it's not about that, right? It's about what is reflective of your spirit, what is reflective of your experience, and these paintings show me that. Kerry James Marshall is another artist that has heavily influenced me and how he shows Black people in regular spaces, in their studio, in the barbershop, right? And he's able to highlight that beauty, also highlight the struggles, highlight the perils of the Black person, right? And how we move through life. Claude Moore is my great-grandfather. He was an activist, a farmer, father, and a man. He grew up in Mississippi, and I wanted to paint this portrait for a while. I wasn't sure how or when, but last year at some point, I found a pallet in the backyard of my parents' house. My dad's a truck driver. He collects pallets, and working with my hands, working with his hands, I think is something that we have in common. And I have to believe that somehow my great grandfather spoke to me, and it was destined for his face to be on this palette. Because I don't know much about him. He died when I was very young, but since making this, I'm learning more and more about him. And so I think the power of our ancestors never goes away, and how we represent their story is indicative of how we also represent our own stories and how we live. And so this was actually acrylic, mixed media on a palette, of course. Some of this, the new work I'm doing is now part of a series called the Keeper series. I was talking to Donna recently, and I was stating again, there's a reason that I'm making this work, right? At the beginning of the pandemic, I kind of lost a little motivation. I wasn't sure, how to move in this space. And this is a piece that I completed right before. And it's formally called In Her Eyes, but I renamed it Dream Keeper, because I wanted to highlight the intensity, in her eyes, her complexion, and also the dreams and the goals that she had for her life. I could see it on her face, and I wanted to show that. And she's also one of my former students from Tennessee State University, Cassie. And I wanted to show Cassie's spirit and hope to influence someone else, to inspire someone else's journey as well. Art with vision that reflects a people's desire and aspirations is an art that is guided by principle. This is a quote from Emory Douglas, Minister of Culture in the Black Panther Party. I was struck by this quote, but I was also struck by the visual imagery. And this is just one example that he was able to show and work with and highlight the vision, the ideas, the goals of the Black Panther Party. And though often misunderstood, there's this strength and this power with which his art engages us as viewers even today. And so with this piece, it's called Keeper of Culture. The Black woman still holds and has had to hold a lot more than just a person, right? She is keeping a legacy. She's keeping her dreams. She's keeping her family intact, the community intact, right? And as an homage to the work that the visual work that Douglas did, I wanted to incorporate in some kind of way to highlight it and embolden her presence, her profile in this image. So hence, I added these rays as a way to kind of harken back to that movement, back to the visual representations of Black people, Keeper of Culture. And so, I'm gonna go back to that. I think that's all I wanted to share, but I guess I'll end on that note. Thank you for letting me share the work that I am making and continue to make. So I'll pass it on to Donna or Stephanie.
Thank you, Lakesha. That was amazing. I wrote down a couple of notes just because I wanted to comment. Lakesha and I, we talk about art quite a bit, and to see your work on in an image, it's nothing like seeing it in person. It's amazing, you guys. And just I love your thought process and the way you render the figure. It's just flawless, really. So thank you for sharing with us. Okay, so I will.
Yeah.
I'll go next, and then we'll have the amazing Stephanie, and she'll go after that and do her talk. I just wanted to talk quickly about some things that I am working on. So social justice and art of Black experience. I just wanted to kind of go through the history or my path as far as becoming an artist, and my thought process behind some of the things that I've done, and then some new things that I haven't really shown yet. Let's see, I'll keep that like that. So these are a series of paintings. So number one, the thing that sparked this sort of work with me is that when I first went to grad school, I didn't want to feel like just because I was Black that I had to talk about Black subjects or Black culture. And so that was a tension, an internal tension that was very hard for me, and it actually showed in the work. And in my program, I went to a low residency program. And so when I started to talk about body image. And when I would do that, I couldn't really talk about the work authentically. And so probably about my third residency in Boston, I just was like, listen, Donna, just talk about the things that you've thought about over time, even as a little kid in some instances. And it was almost like a metaphor for me slamming my fist down on a desk and saying, I'm talking about Black culture, and so that from there, things started to really click for me. And so out of that, these small works entitled Black Women Rock, painting Black female experience came to fruition. And I just thought about hip hop culture. I was thinking about women in general. And these are all women that I know. I've included myself in some of them. God bless them. They do whatever I want them to do. They'll pose for me. And I'll say, put these underwear on your head, please. And try to make sure that we see your personality, even though your eyes are covered. So that was, they're like, okay. So I love them dearly for doing that. And so my desire was to talk about hip hop culture and talk about the idea of Black women at some point in time feeling invisible within American society. And then also objectification of women through hip hop culture. I could have sworn I had that. Sorry about that. Also talking about objectification of women through hip hop music. And so what I wanted to do was take the underwear and basically put it in a different place. If you think about the video girl, this idea of covering the eyes as a symbol of, they're not really seen, their souls aren't really seen, and to look through someone through their eyes, then that kind of, gives you a window into their soul. And then it also removes the underwear and it exposes the private parts. So that was something that was really important for me to note, because, that is the nature of or that's an aspect to some hip hop music. So what's in a name was this idea that came to mind. Oh, that's okay. You can here, I'll advance it. I don't know. I didn't advance that myself. Thank you. Okay. What's in a name came to mind as of just this one day. I was sitting at the computer and I just noticed how when you type in, let me go back real quick. I do have something else to say. the names are very important to me. And coming up, there was this idea of name shaming, I like to call it. And so a so-called ethnic name could not be a so-called regular or normal name, right? And so I wanted to talk about stereotypes with names in this work. And I do that throughout all of my work. But like Kanisha, the civil engineer, Yashika, the marketing director, Shantae, the corporate attorney, that's just the combination that I wanted to name these pieces as a means of eliminating this stereotype about names. And it's not just, there's an element of a systemic stereotype, but then there's also an internal within Black culture, an element of name shaming. You hear, you want to name your child something that will get his or her foot in the door, or their foot in the door for a job interview, that sort of thing. So I think that kind of stems from that. But I'm just on this mission to celebrate any and all names. Donna, Stephanie, Lakesha, Yashika. I've come across a godsend. I have a student who's named Tamiracle, and I absolutely love it. I think it's just one of the most creative things that, like, it's everyone's way of tapping into being creative. So if we go forward here, this was a project that I did as a result of typing names into Microsoft. And then the little red squiggly line pops up under the more less normal names. And so I wanted to shine a light on that. And although you can, what am I trying to say? Although one can, add the name to the directory, you can add a word to your word bank in Word. It still just makes you feel some kind of way that Donna is spelled correctly, so to speak, but Kalina's not, And so I thought tent cards would be a good way to display that idea. This series, What's in a Name, it also again talks about names, but I wanted to put the symbol of this red scarf as kind of like a nod or homage to the symbol of the mammy, and then also connecting beauty to that, and connecting, fun and different faces and just loveliness coming from these Black women's faces. And so I think that symbol is one that has really gotten a bad rep. And in the movies, Gone with the Wind, with Hattie McDaniel, who won an Oscar in the 40s. And I just find it to be interesting. I think she's one of the most beautiful women ever. And I saw a video of her accepting her Oscar, and it just seemed like she was a fish out of water, and it just made, you're in this sea of just one race, and you're like the only Black person there. And so I just felt for her in that moment. And so I think that red scarf was a good symbol to be able to just talk about her and talk about the idea of the mammy and what that represents in our culture. So another thought or idea or reality that I wanted to bring forth in this series of work called Internal Chaos, the Taboos of Mental Health in the Black Community, is just this idea of mental health and how it's something that's not really addressed. It definitely historically has not been addressed as it needed to be in the Black community. And so I thought it would be a good thing to use the selfie as a way to do that. And on this particular day, and these aren't all of them, but there are a number of self-portraits, trying to capture the authentic feeling of that moment in time. And so there are, I think most people feel some degree of depression at some point in time, some more extreme than others. But I wanted to kind of chronicle my experience with depression in this. And so in a couple of them, there are some that don't quite look depressed, but the feeling is there. And then there are some that do give off that image of depression. And then that feeling is there as well. That same feeling is there. So I thought that all of these are really ongoing. None of them are closed out. And it's a process that if one day I'm feeling like I can't even finish the painting, then if my time frame for that painting is to do it in one day, and then I only do the sketch because of how I'm feeling that day, then that's what it is. That will go in the series. So all of them aren't complete. Some of them are very, they'll have just the first layer of paint on them. Some of them, I think one of them is even blank, like totally blank, just white canvas. So I thought that would be something, that I could hopefully allow others to feel that they're not alone in it. And this is really a labor of love that I can't, this particular work, I've been having fun doing it. This is just an image of my process. I put a sketch down first, and then I just go through with this particular work, it's been background color after background color. And so I probably have like about 7 or 8 layers of background colors on this particular painting. But the idea stemmed from one of my friends. He used to be my personal trainer. And so he was like, you should paint me as a king. And I was like, well, I don't want to do just the traditional portrait with a crown on your head, this, that, and the other. And so I left him that day, and it just kind of clicked in my mind to use the toilet as a throne. And that was right in my wheelhouse, because I love using strange things to talk about, other topics. And so so I thought of this toilet as a throne, as a way to talk about Black men's existence in America. And this work started in, let's say, 2017. And so I wanted to use that toilet as a throne to reference our actual ancestry as it pertained to royalty, but to also reference this kind of false sense of royalty within American society with Black men. It's like they have this confidence and this bravado when they walk, and it's just something that can't be matched in my opinion. But then there's just all this injustice with the killing of Black men, and I think it's a nice push-pull way to talk about it. Again, there probably like a slight, very minute sense of humor in it, but also this gate to open to talk about a more serious subject. Let's see. I think I'm going over my time, so I'm gonna go through the rest of this pretty quickly. And then finally, the most recent things, I've come away from painting briefly to shed light on a story that happened back in 1981. And so this gentleman here is my cousin, and it speaks to where we are now with the unjust killing of men and women by the police. And it makes me think about George Floyd. So anytime that happens, it makes me think about my cousin Ronnie. This happened to him back in 1981. He was killed in Signal Hill, California, at the hands of Signal Hill police. And so that was something that happened when I was 9 years old, and it started to, it stayed with me. And so I wanted to talk about like what I call residue, which is what remains within a family after you lose a loved one to such violence. And so with that, I started thinking about family photos, and I wanted to put together just a series of photos in which whoever is no longer with us within those photos, then I've figured out how to Photoshop them out. And I'll just go through these. David Eagleman says there are 3 deaths. The first is when the body ceases to function. The second is when the body is consigned to the grave. The third is that moment sometime in the future when your name is spoken for the last time. And so I think that takes place, and we have to work against the third death, bringing awareness. So this is my grandfather, and I had to Photoshop him out. That was a process. I felt some kind of way, I'll be honest, in that process. And I'll just go through these because I don't want to take more time. My mom, my aunt, and my other aunt, that was Ronnie's mother, and she's out of the photo now. And these are my aunts and uncles. This is Ron's mother, and this is Ronnie. And so I had to take them out. And then these are my uncles, and then here's Ronnie here. And you see I've lost an uncle in addition to, of course, taking Ronnie out. So thank you so much for listening. I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie, and thank you.
Thank you, Donna. I am pulling up. Whew, okay, I need to take a deep breath after what you just shared. It was beautiful, and my mind is going in so many different directions thinking about your work. And Donna, I'm a huge fan and collector of your work, and we don't have to talk. There are a few pieces I saw we need to talk about. Okay, so I'm coming to this conversation thinking about collecting art as a way to intentionally design a life experience. And the act of collecting, there are all sorts of incidental collectors. There are ways that we gather things over time that just happen to be in our space. And I think that's extremely valid and important as a way of record keeping. But I believe there's also a way of collecting that is very conscious of itself in an attempt to fill our life and our space with what we want to experience. And that's what I'm trying to do with the Nia Collection. As you saw in the video earlier, I started collecting while I was pregnant with my daughter, consciously thinking about what her experience in our home will be. So now 20 years later, just kind of a quick overview of what the Nia Collection looks like at this point. It's over 150 works. I'm very interested in the accessibility of collecting, the idea that you don't have to be a millionaire, you don't have to be wealthy, rich, and you might start out at a point where you're financially struggling, but there are ways to start collecting and build that like I've done over time. So I'm really excited to talk about that and share that with people. And a great bit of the work, most of the works that are in the collection center around themes of Black joy, justice, and wisdom. And so I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in my collecting process, the decisions I make, some of the questions I ask myself, and why that really matters to me. Knowing that my daughter was going to be raised as a Black woman in America, I was very aware of the atmospheres and other spaces in which she would find herself at school, day-to-day errands, going to the bank, in the media, watching TV. I was very aware of what she would and would not see in her spaces. So it was important for me to balance some of that in our home. So a lot of times when people say, oh, you collect Black art, that's like this subset of other art in a way. But for me, it was simply a description of who we were and the people we knew. So someone might walk around our house and say, oh, Stephanie collects Black art. And I would say, well, I collect art that speaks to my life, speaks to the people we know, our family, our friends. And I think there are different ways to define it. is Black art work solely by Black artists? Is it more so about the subject matter? So it could be painted or sculpted or created by anyone? Or is it work that reflects certain themes in culture? I think all of these are true and none of them are true. I think it's a challenge to try to encapsulate a Black experience, singular, because there are so many, but that's what excites me about collecting. I could never encapsulate the Black experience in a single work of art. It will take thousands and thousands of works of art. And that's part of what excites me in curating and consciously building a collection that tries to reflect that. So the basic question of why collect, I think there's so many different reasons that people collect art. Often it's a reflection of your values. You're setting a tone in your space. It's an investment. And sometimes when we say investment, we think solely in terms of dollars, and that I buy a work for $5,000 and eventually it'll be worth $50,000. Hopefully that's true. And sometimes we can try to strategically plan for that. But I also think of collecting as a way of investing in ideas and investing in an artist's work. I think budgets are very much a document of values. It's a document of what we believe in and what's important. So when I think of a budget, I think of me telling my money where to go. So when I'm collecting, I'm telling my money to affirm the work of certain artists, to affirm work that centers around certain ideas. So it's an investment for me in that sense. And that's part of designing an experience. Culture is where we clearly see what matters to a people. Culture, arts, and entertainment, because these are, when we're honest with ourselves, as artists, we'll all say that art is matters of, it's of extreme importance. But the truth is, it's not food, it's not shelter, it's not sunshine, right? So culture and where we spend our money when it comes to art and entertainment tell us what matters to us, because those are the optional expenses, right? So for me, collecting is partially a way of designing a document of importance and what matters. I also see collecting as a reflection of self-care, because it's me giving myself permission to surround myself with beauty and inspiration and images that are going to take care of me mentally and emotionally. And there's so many other reasons I know people collect. The question comes up for me, does art live in the past, present, or future? And I'll give you a little context. As a kid, and even now, I love science fiction, and often read lots of sci-fi books. And a lot of them were the choose your own adventure stories where there was time travel involved. And it was, referencing the future by going back to the past and that type of thing. And there was one time I was at the local library, was having a talk on a choose your adventure book. And I was there, a young kid in the audience. And I timidly raised my hand and asked the question. And I said, do Black people exist in the future? And they were like, huh? And it was because a lot of the books I was reading that were futuristic or sci-fi, there were no Black people. And so it was so important for me to find authors like Octavia Butler and others that were writing in the sci-fi genre that included Black people, because I think it does, when you engage in cultural artifacts that don't have certain people and ideas present, it tells you something really, really big. So I see art, of course, there are all sorts of genres and subject matter that artists engage in, but I believe art, you can think of art as artifice or think of art as artifact. Quite often, an artist's work becomes an artifact of a moment. They're capturing a moment of an idea, a process, a person, a place, a time. And so that marker will eventually kind of live in the present. It's a marker of the past in a way. However, the creation of that marker, which now hangs on a wall or stands on a stanchion, becomes part of the atmosphere in that present moment, and it shapes the future. So that if I'm walking by a piece of artwork every day that affects my mood or my ideas, it's shaping my future in a way. So it's a marker of the past that ends up affecting the future. So when I think of collecting artwork and intentional design, I love to design with plants. And I know sometimes it feels like we might be playing between decor and design, but when you design with plants, you have to think about how that plant is living. You're going to eventually have to repot it. You're thinking about the light in the space, the moisture in the space. How can that plant live? I think of artwork in the same way when I'm designing a space. I'm thinking about what's the atmosphere in the room? How is the inclusion of this artwork going to affect that atmosphere? What does the artwork need to live and thrive in the space? And I know that over time that can change. For example, I love Donna's work, and it's so important to me in the spaces in which we have placed it, because it brings a surface levity, like these women with the underwear on their heads. There's a playfulness about it. There's also kind of this empowering moment of them putting it on their heads. It makes me think of my childhood, but there's also so much more behind it, so much depth. But there are some rooms that needed that levity of thought and space. So it's really important for me to think about that. I also have to be aware when I place a work in our collection, the meaning and some of the metaphors or symbolism can change over time. If I place a work in a room that is dealing with, let's say, someone being arrested, what I think of when I purchase that work might be one thing, but if over time there are all these news stories about people being arrested in a certain way, then the metaphor and the symbolism can possibly change over time based on new current events. So I think about plants as something that can change and grow over time, and artwork and my relationship to it can grow and change over time. So a few questions that I ask myself as a collector, beyond do I love this work? Does it speak to me? And beyond thinking about the quality and kind of the trajectory of the artist's life, when I'm thinking about intentionally designing a space, how does it make me feel? If I want to make sure that I walk in my home and I feel comforted, then I need to know that in my front walkway, there's certain types of work there. In other rooms, if I'm designing a room to be more of a down space or a space to be more exciting and whatnot, I'm thinking of that in how I'm designing. So how does it make me feel? How will the work be in conversation with other existing, works in my collection? Also thinking about, how a work affects the atmosphere. And I'll run through just for time because we have so much to talk about. But a few other questions I think about. What is the song? And that might be a slightly funny question, but I will promise you, when you walk around my house or, through a collection, you will not see any work that makes you think of a Negro spiritual. There's no Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. Like, it's not that, because for me, the Black experience is not rooted in pain. It is not rooted in injustice and fear and struggle. It's rooted in joy and wisdom and power. And so I'm not going to surround myself with images that constantly say Black equals struggle. And that's my aesthetic and my statement of values. And it's not to say that those works don't matter. They absolutely matter. They're important. We have to chronicle the whole truth that there is. But when intentionally designing a space, it was important for me to think about what my daughter understood Black to be. So that really matters to me. And then, of course, this is a personal collection. So it's rooted in, does this work affect me, just me and myself as a mother, a wife, a friend, a neighbor, a creator, a citizen of the world? I think these are really important and valid questions we ask ourselves. Being a citizen of the world means that we intentionally think about what is in and what is out. So to say that I'm designing a space that, makes me walk out into the world and be more aware of all realities and people is really important to me. I think anytime we have a space that claims to be intentionally designed, we need to take that as a sign of the decisions of absence and presence truly matter. So if an art collection claims to be art of 20th century America, but there are no Asian people, there are no LGBTQIA people, if a collection claims to be a reflection of contemporary thought, but there are no Black people, there are no rural white people, there are no poor people, then I'm taking that to mean they intentionally did not want to include that, because they'll be very intentional about all sorts of other things. They'll be very intentional. So what is present and absent truly matters when we think about intentional design and when you think about being a citizen of the world and surrounding yourself with things that reflect those values. So I will stop there, and I'm excited to get into conversation about all of this with you, Donna and Lakesha.
Thank you, Stephanie, so much. Thank you, Lakesha. My goodness, I need to take another deep breath because that's like, man, it's just, if I could just come through the screen, I'm like, oh, so excited. Okay, so let's get into some questions that I think will spark a nice discussion here. So, and this is for like we can set up the format so that, you can answer if you want to, but it's open for the three of us to talk about. I'll be more so the facilitator, unless I can't help it. Okay, so what are your thoughts about where we are today in this country as it pertains to racial injustice, politics, and COVID-19? And how have those thoughts impacted you and your work? And anybody can go first.
I'll just really quickly say, for me, safer at home and shelter at home has really highlighted the importance of surrounding myself with images that build me up. So I'm at home. I've been one of those people who is really kind of hunkered down in my home. Mm-hmm. And so I'm seeing my artwork more and more every day, and I'm more aware of how my space makes me feel. And so there are so many things that are absolutely tragic that are happening in our world, and so many things that really need our attention and our conscious work to shift and change and make better right now. And at the same time, home has been a place of solace for me, partially because of what I've been able to surround myself with. And I completely know and see all of the privilege in that.
Mm.
Yeah, it's been it was a difficult time in the beginning, I think, because we had to change, how we taught. And so I couldn't see my students. And for me and my students, I think that was a big adjustment because we weren't around each other. We couldn't communicate in person, right? And you began to see the power in that personal interaction and just being in the same space with, and taking in each other's energy and creative spirits, right? And so that was something that we had to adjust to. And I couldn't really make work. I started talking more to people. I talked to former students, who had graduated, and I started this small group called Moments in the Sun, and we would meet sometimes weekly. We would meet maybe once a month to either unload, to recharge, or to make work together. So that was when I was making a little bit of work because I had others to make work with. So we had like this open studio session. So that was important for me. As I said, to where we are now, I think there's been so much that has divided us that, with the protests, people were able to come together. When we do go out in public, we're still wearing masks, and it's setting up a blockade in a sense, and we aren't able to show ourselves. And so that's still a struggle for me. I went out a couple times this week, and I didn't have my mask on. I went in the store, and and it frightened me. I said, "Oh no, I don't have my mask on," but I was seen, and there was something freeing in that. And so I don't know. There's this there's a push-pull thing that's been happening. I think because we still want to be seen, but we also have to be safe. So there's this balance that we've had to kind of play with a little bit, and I think that's overall because there's this tension, there's confusion. But then, like as Stephanie said, how do you bring peace to your life? How do you bring that inner joy and also share with others? And so I think that's been an important thing that we've actually had to take part in self-care, and spreading good energy and positivity in a lot of ways. So.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll say real quickly, like for me, I found similar to what you were saying, Stephanie and Lakesha, I found that I became very comfortable with being at home, number one, to stay safe. And then also because I was relieved that, okay, now I'm confined to somewhere where I could possibly get more work done, and then I was able to balance that with going to the studio because nobody's at the studio. And as long as I wear a mask, I felt pretty comfortable venturing out there. So the way that it would impact my work would have been to just be a little more productive, and then to also include those themes of what we're going through now in the work. Okay, great. So let's see how I want to move. Well, no, I'll ask this question. Can you each share, and it can be any medium, share and talk about a work that you have made prior to 2020 that you have reviewed in this unprecedented year and draw its relevance to our current times? And let's go, Lakesha, you go first.
Well, I will say, I was thinking about this piece. It's called Collective Sentiment. I've shown it in Nashville only a couple times, but it's about 20, maybe 18 years old. I made it. It's of my brother, or two of my brothers and my father, and they're sitting, kind of in this with the similar expressions, kind of forlorn or just thinking, right, in thought. And when I made that, I was simply talking about youth and innocence and how no matter what age we can feel that same, we can have the same feelings and experiences, right? But now, in 2019, 2020, even 2016, that painting resonates with so much more significance now, being that, they are Black men, young men now, in this society. And one of my brothers, he had a hoodie. He fit the description one day. He was leaving class at the downtown campus, and a couple of cops stopped him, all because he fit that description, and so there's a need to protect, and protect through work, through the artwork, but also protect in a very physical sense to your family, the men and the women, that have made up your existence and identity, right? And that piece for me definitely resonates in a whole new light now when I see it.
Yeah. I have a collection of poems. It was actually my thesis collection for my MFA program. It's called What the Birds Know, and they're historically inspired poems that tell the story of two half-sisters who free themselves from a Middle Tennessee plantation. And I decided a few years after graduating that I didn't want to publish the poems because I didn't want so much emphasis on that aspect of of our story. And rereading them now, I'm realizing that was a flawed decision on my part because they weren't poems about slavery. They were poems about two women deciding their own destiny and deciding where they were safest and deciding and giving themselves permission to create the lives they wanted to live. I fell into some flawed thinking, and like looking at where we are now, I think so much of what we're battling is, where are we safe? What can we control and what can we not control? And I think the poems actually have a resonance that I didn't even realize at the time that I wish I had valued in a different way.
Oh, thank you. That I would say for me, the portraits of Black men with the toilets. The series is called The Royal Court. That's something that I started again in 2017, and it's just kind of like an ongoing series. But I feel like it relates to where we are today as far as racial injustice. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention, the work about that deals with family and residue and loss, memory and reality, about losing a loved one to such violence for no reason other than the color of their skin. Yeah.
Oh, and I'm real quick, just thinking about collecting.
Yeah.
A work by Sam Bernsen, and it's a man who's in prison and he's reading the Bible. And I've always loved that work because it shows such a rich interior life. But looking at it now with the context of the criminal justice or criminal injustice system, it takes a whole new meaning. So as a collector, that's one part I can definitely say when I invested in the work, it meant one thing to me, and now its meaning has grown and shifted in some way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, so there's this idea that I wanted to bring forth about work that speaks to a or many Black experiences and how that can change, how the exhibition of that work or putting that work in like commercial spaces within everyday life. So kind of like this realism scenario of going into a bank lobby and seeing work that speaks to Black experience. Do you guys think that can change the narrative or change the actions of injustice?
I think it's definitely a part of it. It's like what goes in comes out in some sort of way, right? And so if the only ideas and images that are going into people's minds, and we know that can come from reading, it can come from music, it can come from research and study, it comes from where we eat, the people we hang out with, like there are all sorts of ways that input happens. But visual imagery and visual, processing is constant. So like, I would just say normalize Blackness as a wide range and humanize and make sure that it's humanized. And that absolutely makes a difference when it comes to justice and injustice. Because when we realize that people are whole human beings, not just these concepts of what we see on the news, we interact with people differently. So if you move around physical spaces that represent the whole human experience of all people, then it makes you think of things beyond just a slogan or beyond just this flat concept, but you see this is a whole human with a whole human experience. And so in that way, in that sense, yeah, visual representation absolutely matters, especially if you have that representation for all sorts of other groups of people, but not one. And this is Latina people. This is a whole range. So it's not just about Black and white, obviously, but when you see a whole movement that has a slogan, Black Lives Matter, like such a simple statement that is actually argued and refuted by some people, it's clear to me that there are a lot of people who haven't been in a space where Black Lives Matter, where the visual imagery, where the relationships and all other communications did not affirm that Black Lives Matter. But suddenly when they're confronted with that phrase, it's just an affront to all things right. Because it hasn't been heard and seen anywhere else. So, yeah, I think imagery absolutely matters.
Absolutely.
Humanizing a space or an image is something I was thinking about. When you asked this question, I think of the work of Titus Kaphar and how the images of the mothers and their children, but then the children being absent, kind of whited out from the scene and that idea of loss and what that means. And all of us can relate to this experience of loss. And as you said, it's one aspect of what Black mothers, brown mothers have gone through, right? But it's an important aspect. So if that's shown, if it's shown in another light where it's another type of portrait, of a Black and brown person, that is something that definitely allows us to see from the cookie cutter frame, that we're used to, kind of looking through, that same lens, right? It allows us to color it in a different way. And I think it's important, for it to be in different types of spaces, so that we can talk more, have more conversations about it and create more understanding in our respective experiences.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely agree. Okay, so what I could ask more, but I figured that we need to give. Does anybody have? That's the conclusion. I'll stop right there just for the sake of time. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question for you, Donna and Lakesha, as visual artists. How do you work through a situation where you created work with a very specific meaning and idea in mind, and other people interpret it differently? How do you navigate that?
Oh, that's a really good question. Go ahead, Lakesha.
So it's interesting for me. I know I don't produce work that's particularly controversial, right? But I admire the work of Kerry Mae Weems, and she said, I wanted to quote her. She said, "How we lived in this country by its very nature makes us political, right?" And sometimes it's as simple as us being, as we've seen, right? And so how I've navigated in the past, I try to operate from a space of understanding and grace for the most part, But for instance, when I was an undergrad, I was the one of, I think, only one Black person in the painting department, and I made a painting of my two brothers. One is darker skin, one is very light skin, and he's holding the lighter skin of my brother, up, and someone in the group, had said something about that, and she said something about a Black child holding, and other people were upset for me, and here I am, because I lived this experience. It didn't really faze me, because this is what I know, right? And so I think sometimes we feel led to or prompted to make work that is X, Y, and Z, like you said earlier. But I think sometimes stepping away from that expectation is very freeing. And so that's kind of how I've navigated it, and sometimes I will address it through poetry more than the visual, image. And so I don't know, I try to walk through it authentically, as possible, and not be pushed into a space that I'm not ready to show,
That's a really good question, Stephanie. With me, I have a couple of different scenarios. So if I always like to leave room or space in my brain for a different perspective, and if it is enlightening to me once I hear it, then I'm like, oh wow, I didn't think about it that way. It may come into the way that I talk about the work, and it may not. If it stays with me, then I'll mention it, but I still, even though I will still reference the conversation that took place. And so I get that a lot with those, with that series of with the underwear on the head. My mind is going, I'm sorry. And so that was more of a positive interaction and exchange of ideas. But then with the Royal Court, it's like I have my specific ideas and the reason why I made the work. And I've shown it to people with studio visits, and it's just been like, huh?
How did you get that? How did you get there?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, haven't you ever heard of a toilet like referred to as a throne? Like, we used to have like this little wooden thing up at my grandmother's house, and that's what idea popped in my head. And so I just take that with sometimes it can get to you, but other times, like, I take it and I use it as fuel to just further hash out my ideas.
Yeah.
So
I get that.
All right. Well, thank you for that question. That was an amazing question. Thank you to the Nashville Design Week team, and thank you, Paige, for having us.